So this is a short story called Orbit. It's the start of the story, and what I was aiming to do when I started the story was I wanted to write about a child character who witnesses violence, and it's a child character who isn't used to witnessing violence. That was my goal when I wrote the story. It's called Orbit. Dad used to tell me when Cato was alive that if he ever got into a fight with the Doberman down the street, I should never, under any circumstances, step in and try to break it up. He made me promise that I would run away because Dad said even though Cato loved me, if I got between them they would rip me up. Dogs were dogs, and in the middle of a fight, Cato would forget who I was. We crossed the road. Miss Chester tells us to find our buddies and hold their hand. Dylan looks across at me and hovers his hand near mine, and I don't want to touch him either. Crystal was supposed to be my buddy, but we were late this morning, and Miss Chester said, "Oh, honestly, girls, it won't kill you to go with someone else. You're not getting married." Behind me, Crystal is stuck with Samir, who always does his schoolwork but never says boo to anyone because he doesn't speak the language. Miss Chester doesn't want children, not ever. Crystal asked her 2 weeks ago when we found out that Mrs. Martin, the music teacher, was pregnant and hadn't just been wearing all those flowy dresses for fun. Crystal said to Miss Chester, "Is that because we're like your children?" And she snorted and said it was because she thinks having children is very risky and she'd never get any peace and quiet, and she gets enough of us buggers at school, thank you very much. And who is Crystal? Her mother? Then Jake asked, "What about Mr. Chester?" which is what our teacher sometimes calls her boyfriend, even though they're not married. Miss Chester said that Mr. Chester would love children, but he won't be bloody having them with her. "Aren't you supposed to compromise when you love someone?" Jake said. She turned her back on stupid Jake to write on the board and said yes, but not like that. In the middle of our excursion to the Orbit, Mr. Chester shows up. I don't know it's him at first. I think he's just a man in an Arsenal jersey who lives in Stratford. But then Miss Chester says, "Russell?" And her face looks like the time our head teacher, Mr. Walcott, came into the classroom when we were making lots of noise because the DVD player wouldn't work. And I remember that her boyfriend's name is Russell. "Russell, what are you doing here?" He lifts himself off the park bench beneath the Orbit. He walks through the ragged lines we've made with our excursion buddies, just ploughs on through as though he doesn't even see us in our fluoro vests, and stance right over to Miss Chester for a big kiss. But instead he grabs her arm and yanks it like he's tightening a bolt with a spanner. In 1 second, her arm is behind her back and she takes a step backwards and she says his name again and topples to the ground. Mum says they shouldn't waste millions of pounds on things like the Orbit, and that politicians shouldn't be allowed to do whatever they want with everyone's money when loads of people are starving in Africa and even in the north of England. Now that the Olympics are over, she wonders why anyone would want to go to Stratford for fun, and what are they going to do with that big empty stadium? When I'm older, I'm not going to pay any tax except to buy computers in schools and hospital equipment for babies and animal rescue centres. But I wanted to go on the excursion, so last week I asked Dad to sign the letter during an ad break for Fifth Gear. "What's this then?" he said. "Miss Chester's taking us to the Orbit?" He shifted around in his recliner and the cap fell from his thighs. He skimmed the paper twice. "That thing," he said. And I thought he was going to say exactly what Mum said, and I wondered if adults only marry people who agree with them. "It's quite interesting, isn't it?" he said. "Like someone's had a bit of fun with Meccano." "Mum doesn't like it." He said. "Can I go?" He put his left hand under the paper to make a table and wrote his signature on the bottom of Miss Chester's letter, the P from Paul, looking like a pregnant lady who's about to pop. By then Fifth Gear was back on and he'd already taken his glasses from his face, and Millie was stalking her claws back onto his thighs. The Orbit has a long name that is the name of the man who built it, but everyone just calls it the Orbit, even Mayor Boris Johnson, who's very keen on it and seems to want everyone else to like it too. On the video we watch on the bus, Boris is wearing bright yellow, and just like the letter home said, we have to wear fluoro vests and hard hats in case bits of steel fall on our heads. Crystal's vest is too big for her, and mine smells. Our tour guide is a short man called Darren, who looks like he's just come from an action film. His hair is cut spiky even though it's grey, and he must be as old as my dad. He says he's delighted to see us. Excursions always start like this, but by the end, Darren will be rubbing his forehead and telling Miss Chester that he doesn't know how she does it day in, day out. Now, Darren says, has anyone seen 2,000 tonnes of steel before? Samir puts up his hand, which means Jordan does too. Well, boys, you probably think you have, but not like this. Darren asks Miss Chester to go first. What does the orbit remind her of? I think it looks like a roller coaster. Crystal whacks me with the back of her hand because that's what she said when we got here. Darren nods and said, yep, a lot of people say that. Someone else? There are no wrong answers. It's art. Maybe some chains, Madison says, putting up her hand at the end of her sentence so our teacher won't yell. Dylan says, like an alien spreading DNA over its host. A rocket? Says one of the Smith twins. A rocket, hey? Darren smiles and frowns at the same time. He stands back and shades his eyes to look up at the steel. Pretty weird looking rocket. But yeah, I guess, could be. After we've been to the observation deck at the top and Crystal and I can't find anywhere to carve our names, and the view of the stadium is okay, but also a bit boring because you can look at it on Google, Miss Chester says it's time to go, and we take the lift to the bottom and we burst out into the sunshine. Find your buddies for lunch, she says. Crystal forgets the bit about Samir being her buddy and she crash tackles me with a hug. I see a man in a red jersey sitting on a bench and lots of other people wandering around, taking photos and drinking from water bottles because it's hot. People can only come to the orbit for a few months before they close it again. We're lucky to be here. Russell, Miss Chester says to the man in the Arsenal jersey who is walking towards her. Russell doesn't look like someone's dad. He's younger than Miss Chester and skinny and tall. What are you doing here? She says. At first I wonder if Russell is meeting us for lunch, and that could be interesting. Jake and Connor will hassle him about Arsenal and why he doesn't go for West Ham. Maybe Russell will buy everyone a Coke. Maybe with her boyfriend around we'll see Miss Chester smile. Russell wants to have children, but he won't be bloody having them with her. Thank you.